In April of 67, we got the store in November of 66. I went to walk into the store after having lunch, and I saw my poor clerk, who was a classics major. He was especially in Hellenistic Greek and Latin, with eyeballs about the size of a dinner plate, and a bunch of guys, and I said, ooh, this looks interesting. And I walked in, and 5 cops came over, guys who had eaten too many dinners for many years, and grabbed me and said, you're under arrest, you dirty pornographer. And they tried to close the store down. They arrested us for Lady Chatterley's Lover. In 1952, the Supreme Court had held on the basis of redeeming literary and artistic merit that was a prime example of a masterpiece that was clearly free from any prosecution, and it had been laughed out of every court in the country, and Seattle hadn't got the message yet. And of course, being on the ACLU board of directors, this galvanized a lot of opinion. We had this huge outpouring, and hysteria broke loose, and that was the event that turned the Ave into a political dynamo. Until that time, it had been people going out there and going to the Palmier House or the Igravon and playing chess in the window and sipping some of that funny strong coffee from San Francisco and being an intellectual. And I and most of my friends were much more proactive. We were historically grounded, we were politically grounded, we'd been through the wars in the South, we knew about this thing, and we brought people together. Well, one of my fellow professors at the university, John Spellman, organized a mass protest. Our landlord was Pacific National Bank. The man that had done all this trouble for us was one of their new guys from the police department. They gave him a nice job. John had a run on the bank. They had a march up the Ave. 2,000 people closed their accounts. The bank went into hysterics. Mass protests. And from that time on, mass protests followed any negative act. The bank backtracked. They fired the man. They offered us free rent forever if we'd stay there. Anything just to get the bad publicity to go away. And so sometimes, as we found out, in negative things and frustrated protest can lead you to very good outcomes. And we took that lesson to heart, and we were pretty consistent with that from that point on. And so these things, that's how that kind of wove in. And at that point, the id was probably the thing that welded all this together. There was a bunch of young kids like Walter Crowley and stuff started hanging out there. And Walter was still in high school and he wasn't getting much traction. And so we gave him some expression. We hired him to do artwork. We displayed his artwork. We had him do writings for us. We put him on some of our publications. And then he and Paul Dorpat and a couple other friends of ours went and started a newspaper called The Helix. And they brought me on as an art director and a writer and various things. And I think that it was when institutions like that started rising, this would be 68, 69, we started getting a voice, we started getting identity, we started getting a self-expression. And I think that's when things started coalescing. Then you started seeing much more focused things. The University District Street Fair started then. Just boom, out of the blue. We created that out of nothing, and it's still going on. It's not the same. But certainly, at least, the semblance of it goes on, as an institution. Organizations were started and founded. And things slowly, other things that had been there for the same underlying social reasons, gained a new impact. One of the things, we started a thing called the Free University of Seattle. Across the street from the ed, upstairs above Orange Julius, there's some space, and Miriam Rader was the real force there. Her father, who was a professor who had been savaged by the House Un-American Activities Committee. And she had inherited that political liberalness and outspokenness, and said if you can educate people, you can't get classes in political protest. You can't get classes in Southern folk stories. They're not taught at the universities, and they're taught at kind of cutesy at a distance. So we started this thing for vibrant classes on important current issues and things. I started teaching calligraphy there because no one else had heard of it. I'd come up to the state of Washington after being one of the pioneers of that, and no one knew about it, so I started teaching it. And within about 5 years, I had a couple hundred people doing it. And there's just all kinds of initiatives, musical classes and political activism classes, and and how to organize a book group and stuff. The university felt really threatened by that. We had to move a couple times because they pressured landlords to get rid of us. And finally they started the experimental college in order to kill the free university. And they started offering classes cheaper, and they started refusing space on campus to the free university, and just, so it finally just went away because it had done, I think, what it intended to do. And so that's another side of looking at this that I encourage people to look at, which is that what were we intending to do? We were not intending to start an institution like another university. We were starting something that worked on an educational level and model in order to show people it could be done and how to do it so they would go do it themselves. We are much more interested not in doing things, having control of things, of seizing power like previous political groups had, like say the anarchists, the socialists, but that we wanted to empower people to take over their lives and do it themselves. But I think that in the long run, we were spectacularly successful. We changed American laws, we changed the way we look at things, we changed the way that people feel about things. Now you see that things lose their impact. When we ran a protest march in 1968 and 67, the world took notice. It was front page news. My God, we marched down the freeway. We closed the freeway down. Just try that now. Maybe this would be Homeland Security coming in and get you traitors off the streets. In some ways, I'm sad that it all closed down. We had an option in '72 to close the IT or to revive it. We'd had huge shoplifting. My staff had been less than helpful. I had to think about whether I wanted to have 3 of them arrested. In fact, it was so bad. Now these are pillars of the community, but in those days, steal this book as a book title, it meant just what it said. We had 300 copies stolen. And we decided for a plethora of reasons. Change being one of them. Staleness being another, that it was time to close. Let people eat their hearts out and think about it. And of course we spawned a whole bunch of new bookstores like Red and Black, for example, and Left Bank Books. They were started by our staff and customers in response to the fact that it wasn't a new bookstore anymore. We couldn't do it as hippies. We tried, we got it going. But the next generation, we went off in the woods. We had communes, some people did. We started the whole town. We had a mayor. We had a road committee. We had all these things, And after a while, we got tired of it, gave it up. 6 to 8 years later, we came back. And of course, we went for a reason. There was quite a depression. The Vietnam War, like the Iraq War, bankrupted us, and there's hard times. I could live for $350 a year on the river. It would cost me 3 times that in town if I was living poorly. And we came back out in '78, '79, and we thought we'd come to Mars. We did not recognize society. There were no hippies. There was no involvement in action. We'd gone through Dick Nixon and getting rid of him, and a nothingness president who was just to not rock the boat. And everyone was wearing 3-piece suits, and their dream was to get rich quick in less than 10 years by screwing everybody and then never work again. And we said, what happened? These people were wearing tie-dye with me 8 years ago, and now they're all these brokers. So this is where this economic problem has come from. Something happened in there, and we lost control of our lives and our society. We gave it up for the sake of gain. Yeah, I'd love to see young kids today, getting out and finding ways to be relevant. Unfortunately, I think things like the WTO thing, it shows the frustration. It shows a level of organization that certain political action groups have put together, but I don't think it's effective anymore. Mm-hmm. We need new ways of being effective. We need new ways of dealing with things. Documentary films, I think, are one of those ways. We can certainly see this with some of the more popular ones that come out in the last couple of years. You can say, well, gee, everyone was dissing it and saying how bigoted and all this stuff it was, but it got people talking. It made them pay attention. They had to go see it. It's like one of the cops that busted us, they said, well, how did you know this was a pornographic? Oh, he said, it was racy, Your Honor. It was so bad, I had to come back and read it 6 times to make sure it was as bad as I thought it was. Well, we saw where that one was going.